Good morning. We are so grateful to have you here today attending Parent Learning Hour. We're going to be talking about understanding behaviors and what is your child's behavior trying to communicate to you. We've done this presentation, something like this before. We kind of edited this and tweaked it a little bit so that it's a little bit more updated and we have some more proactive strategies in order to help with your child's behaviors and what they're trying to tell you. I am Anna Zerfus with Stone Soup Group. And today my co-teacher is Lisa Kozarek from the Special Education Department in Fairbanks. So, what is behavior? All behavior is a form of communication. There is always a reason for a behavior, positive or negative. You can learn to understand and interpret a children's behavior, and challenging behavior can be reduced with support. We do need to make sure that we note that behaviors can be self-injurious as well as outward. So besides some of the behaviors we have listed here, biting, squealing, kicking, fidgeting, crying, noises or tones of voice, are there any other behaviors that you have seen that are not here?
I don't know if you guys have had much exposure to Down syndrome kids. There has this mannerism that I've seen other Down syndrome kids do. And it's like putting your hands together and rubbing like right here, like their kind of abdomen down to their crotch area. I've just noticed other Down syndrome children do it.
Yeah, that is the behavior that I've seen with not just Down syndrome kids, but several kids over the years.
That is actually really important to keep in mind. A lot of kiddos, because they do not know how to soothe themselves, they will do behaviors that we, as neurotypical, will see as negative or sexual, and that is not actually what they're having in their heads. So that is also something to keep in mind when you look at a behavior, especially something that we would interpret as sexual.
And that's a good time to, if you see that happening a lot, and you see it consistently, it's a good time to kind of brainstorm with the people around you and decide what a good replacement behavior would be. So every time someone sees him doing that, instead of doing that, what would you rather have him do instead? Would you rather have him kind of pat his legs, or instead try to teach him to like drum on his belly or something of that sort? If it's one of those things that you find that will be inappropriate as they get older. Sometimes those types of things will just wear off and you won't see them anymore. It's a short burst. But you have to keep in mind, the longer the behavior goes, the harder it is to change that behavior. And so if you have been seeing it for an extended period of time, normally it's a good time to find a replacement behavior, and just simply every time you see him do them, redirect to whatever you want that replacement behavior to be. And since he's already focusing on his stomach area, I would suggest finding something that was with the stomach area. Sometimes they're happy to just kind of drum on the stomach area, or you can teach him to kind of rub in a circle instead of up and down. And those sort of things it gives them the same sensation, but finds a more appropriate public display of behavior when you're out and about with other people.
So what are some purposes of communication? Most of us probably already know this, but we want to talk about how a child senses their environment and how they express that communication. They can be doing a behavior to control their environment. They could be doing it to express a sensory need. They could be doing it to get away from something that is undesired, some kind of stimuli. They could be doing it to get something, and this is something we see quite a bit. They could be doing it to gain attention. They need attention. A good example is, a baby starts crying. That is the behavior, is crying. What is she trying to communicate to you? Possible answers could be looking for the parent. When babies are really young, they need that attention for their brain wiring. They could be hungry. They could be too hot or too cold. They could be needing their diaper changed. So every behavior has a reason. And if you can find that reason, you are able to redirect it into positive and appropriate behaviors.
So some considerations as you go along. Try to keep a focus on what your child is communicating and avoid labeling your child as bad. When you do this, you'll be able to put the behavior in perspective and focus on strategies to help your child. So what is your child's developmental age is a good question to ask yourself and your team. Developmental delays can affect your child's ability to communicate with you. So they use those behaviors sometimes instead of words. So one of the big things is never assume anything. Without a factual backup, an assumption is really only a guess of what is going on. So it's where you become the detective. Ask yourself, are you sure the child actually knows if there's rules that are set? Do they know that they're breaking those rules? Do they understand the reason for the rule? Do they understand that if they do X, there's going to be a safety issue that comes after it? Are they behaving poorly because of health? They're trying to say something's wrong and they just don't know how to tell you that. Are they breaking the rule because there's a different underlying cause? So kind of an example, a child they eat a snack out of their lunch bag at school early because they were worried about finishing their project. They're doing it because they didn't eat breakfast. And kind of the result is now they're hungry because you're at lunch and there's nothing there. So behaviors can kind of go between places as the day goes on. And don't ever assume that just because you're doing one thing, the behavior is directly connected. Now, sometimes they definitely are directly connected, but sometimes all of a sudden the kid thinks of something different. Wait, I didn't have breakfast. I need to have something right now. It's not snack time, but the kid's going to go grab something out of their lunchbox. They don't get the consequence that if they eat the stuff out of their lunchbox, they won't have anything for lunch. So as you go along, really, it's your time to turn into the detective and really pay attention to what's going on with your kids. There's a lot of uneven development in a child, and here's kind of an example. So you can see that the actual age is 10. They've got some strengths that in art, sports, or music that kind of puts them at the age of 13, but their expressive language puts them at 11. Receptive language only puts them at about age 7. Reading comprehension is only at age 4. Math comprehension is at age 6, and developmental age is at age 8. So you can see where the child spans all over. So child development guidelines give you the ages at which children typically develop various physical, reasoning, social, and emotional skills. We have to continually keep in mind that a child with disabilities may have an uneven developmental path, and that can help us assist in understanding what the child's behavior is, or maybe what they're communicating, where they're at on that scale. So when it comes to executive functioning skills, the brain doesn't fully develop until the mid-20s, normally 25, 26 years old. So we need to make sure that expectations that we set are realistic for the developmental age of the child. Children need to be taught executive functioning skills. These are not skills that they are born with automatically at all.
Science tells us that brains, minds, are built, not born. And at the center of this dynamic architecture are a set of skills called executive function and self-regulation.
Children's self-regulation and executive function are key ingredients in their lifetime performance. It's not just about learning language or learning numbers or learning colors.
We have to be able to work effectively with others, with distractions, with multiple demands. These actually are skills that contribute to the productivity of the American workforce.
Don't do that! Just look at your shapes. What should you have done next?
Educators, I think, are looking for just this sort of thing. And when we describe what we mean by executive function, they say, yes, that's it. That's exactly, the problem. These kids, they can tell me these rules, but they can't actually use them.
What's this?
A toolbox.
A toolbox.
What is executive function?
Safety goggles.
Probably the best way to think about it is sort of like an air traffic control system in the brain. Just like an air traffic control system has to manage lots of airplanes going on lots of runways and really exquisite timing and so on, a child has to manage a lot of information and avoid distractions. We really think of it as involving working memory and inhibitory control and mental flexibility. Take a situation where a child is having to take turns. So first of all, the child has to have inhibitory control. The child has to be able to stop whatever he or she is doing and let the other child take a turn.
Cute.
But when it's your turn again, you also have to remember what it is you're supposed to be doing. So that pulls on working memory. If the children who are taking the turns after you do something unpredictable, you have to be able to adjust what you're going to do next. And that requires mental flexibility. Children who are struggling with these capacities often look like children who just aren't paying attention, or children who are deliberately not controlling themselves.
If you don't have self-regulation, you act out and the teacher puts you in timeout, and so then you miss part of the learning that's going on, and then you are more upset because you're behind, and so you act out, and so you get this downward spiral.
How does executive function develop?
7. And +4.
In little children, and even in the infant and toddler years, you begin to see the roots of executive functioning skills. What's going on in our brains is unbelievably intricate and complicated.
The prefrontal cortex, or the front third of the brain, is important for executive function. But it's more than just prefrontal cortex. This region doesn't act alone. It's involved in controlling your behavior through its interactions with all other parts of the brain. The brain goes from a situation where you've got nearest neurons communicating very strongly with each other and ignoring the rest of the brain, to these widespread networks that are connecting these different areas. Executive function changes over the life course. It improves radically over the first few years.
I got a match gun.
It continues to improve throughout adolescence. It's not until early adulthood that you have the adult-type networks that are very strongly activated that connect different brain regions together.
Let's take notes.
Also, we believe that executive functions can be trained.
It's just like going to the gym. So the more you practice in these areas, the stronger the capacity is likely to become, because you're hoping to strengthen those neural connections.
You're at 24.
Slowly but surely, you're going to be able to step back, and that child's going to go into the world with these skills where they can get along with other people, change rules, and they can be flexible, and they can accomplish new things, and they're unafraid.
I got bit by my dog in my arm. Oh dear.
If we don't learn these skills during the childhood and adolescent years when they're coming online, we are really ill-equipped as an adult to hold a job, to maintain a marriage, to raise children, to get along with each other, to basically be part of a civil society.
You're okay.
Depending on the source that you look up, you'll find that there's anywhere between 3 and 11 executive functioning skills. There are a couple that do say there are 12, but Peg Dawson has 11 of the emotional functioning skills that she focuses on. So the behavior ones are emotional control, time management, sustained attention, goal-directed persistence, task initiation, and response inhibition. The thinking skills are the planning, time management, organization, working memory, and the metacognition.
So when we talk about self-regulation, there are a couple of different strategies that are used both at home and in schools. Some of you may be familiar with the zones of regulation. They are a systematic visual representation that connects how a child behaves to what they are feeling. And it is used frequently in schools by both parents and educators. The window of tolerance is also a visual representation and is used more for older children and adults, but especially useful for caregivers to understand where the child and adult may be at and how to get them back where they need to be. Positive reinforcement is a goodie, but an oldie but a goodie. It is teaching the child or adult a behavior through positive attention or reward. So speaking a little bit more in depth on the zones of regulation, it is that systematic approach that teaches regulation by categorizing all the different ways we feel and our states of alertness that we experience minute to minute every day into 4 concrete colored zones. Using this strategy, students are able to build the skills in emotional and sensory regulation, executive functioning, and social emotional thinking. This framework is designed to help move students toward independent regulation while also honoring and respecting each student and their uniqueness. Because of this, there is no good or bad zone. Each zone is a communication and can be positive or negative depending on the feeling. It teaches students through this kind of zones of skills that can help develop those pathways in the brain that build awareness of their feelings and what they're feeling inside, and then use those tools and strategies for the regulation, the pro-social skills, self-care, and being overall well. If you have ever watched the movie Inside Out by Pixar, you will recognize the characters on the right. This movie is a great illustration of how zones can work separately and together, and the learning process to get there. Sometimes this one is new to people. This is called the window of tolerance. It's a term coined by Dr. Dan Siegel and is commonly used to understand and describe normal brain-body reactions. It is made up of 3 areas and explains what can push each of us out of our comfort zone. The comfort zone is, of course, the ideal state, and most times during the day, we fluctuate within levels of our comfort zone. When we become overstimulated in any way, it could be from fear, pain, anger, happiness, joy, trauma, you name it. It can push us outside of our window of tolerance. This can result in hyper or hypoarousal. Hyperarousal usually includes excessive energy and escalation that can be seen in some form, whether it's anxiety, panic, hypervigilance, emotional flooding, jumping up and down, being super, adrenaline, this keeps our system stuck in the on position, and it can impact our ability to relax, often making it difficult to sleep, eat, digest our food, manage our emotions. At the most intensified level, this can result in that rage, hostility, and super aggressive behavior that a lot of times we coin seeing red. It is the more common reaction when pushed out of the comfort zone. Hypoarousal, a lot of times isn't talked about. We've always talked about escalations and aggressiveness, but we do see this in a lot of kids. This is the freeze response. It can include behaviors like just completely shutting down or going on autopilot. It can be triggered by many of the same things that push each of us out of our comfort zone. It is just a different response. This response is seen more in kiddos with disabilities and traumatic histories because they don't understand or cannot process how to act or move forward with what they are feeling inside of them. Then we have reinforcement. Reinforcement, if done correctly, results in a behavior occurring more frequently in the future. Punishing a child for a behavior may stop the behavior for the moment, but it does not give the child support or provide alternative ways to act in difficult situations. Reinforcement increases the likelihood of a desired behavior occurring again. So children's challenging behavior can be reduced with support, not punishment. Once the adults around the child understand what they are communicating through their behavior, they can respond better. Also, when children feel respected and have their needs met, there is no longer a reason to use the challenging behavior to communicate. It does take time to get to that stage, though. There are two types of reinforcement, positive and negative. Positive reinforcement is adding something pleasant to increase the desired behavior. Negative reinforcement is doing something in order to remove something unpleasant and increase a desired behavior. So with negative reinforcement, you are increasing a behavior, whereas with punishment, you are decreasing a behavior. As an example, when adults help children find positive ways to communicate their needs to others, children can learn important social and problem-solving skills that will help them through their lifetime.
So consistent positive reinforcement is the fuel that keeps the fire burning long enough to achieve any change that you desire. So we're going to take a look at this clip. Let us know if you can't hear it.
Sorry, Lisa.
No, you're fine.
Reinforcement is a technique used to improve behavior. It works with children in the classroom or at home, especially kids on the autism spectrum and with behavior problems. Dog training uses positive reinforcement. You say, sit, and the dog sits. Then you give it a treat. The reward motivates the dog to sit on command to earn another treat. Positive reinforcement exists in the natural world. If you are thirsty and you take a drink of water, you feel satisfied and you will probably take a drink the next time you feel thirst. Any action that gives you a positive result will inspire you to repeat it. It is easier to notice annoying, rude, distracting, or inattentive behavior. We usually reprimand bad conduct. Punishment can be the quickest way to stop a bad behavior, but the effect doesn't last. Punishment can backfire, as when a child misbehaves to gain attention. However, when you encourage desired behaviors, they tend to happen again and again. The most effective rewards are adult attention, time, and verbal appreciation. Frequent and consistent positive feedback works best. Repeating the reward strengthens good behavior. A good standard is to give 5 positive reinforcements for each correction. Rewards can be simple, such as a smile, a nod, or saying thank you. For instance, you can acknowledge a child for sitting quietly, raising her hand, or other good behaviors 5 times. If the child then does something bad, like breaking a glass, you can say, "Please remember to be careful." Then you start the cycle of 5 positive reinforcements again. Positive reinforcement can work in many situations, with workers, teenagers, toddlers, and even on yourself. When starting a new exercise routine, give yourself a reward right after you work out. Positive reinforcement helps you stick to your routine. Getting started with positive reinforcement requires conscious effort. Resolve to breaking the habit of noticing only bad behavior and instead focus on good conduct. Thank you for watching our video. We're always working on more videos.
So there are different strategies for positive reinforcement. We need to make sure that we keep realistic expectations for both the student and the adult, making sure it's something that can be put in place and is not so far out that it's unattainable to go ahead and do that repetitiously. We need to make sure that we plan ahead. So if you have some sort of physical reinforcer that you want to have to give a kid, say a kid, you want to hand them a fidget toy every time they do something, we need to plan ahead and make sure that we have those items with us. Simple expectations in advance. We need to make sure that the kids understand what we want out of them. What do we expect? And what are those expectations at a realistic level, and how does the kid go ahead and attain those things? Limited and reasonable choices. It's very important to make sure, again, to keep it reasonable. We need to have, you can have 1 or 2 choices of positive expectations of, say, a positive reinforcer, and they need to be reasonable things. We don't want to be so far out that we cannot realistically produce an item when a student does something that is positive. Use when and then statements. So when you complete your work, then you can help erase the whiteboard, something that the kid likes. Or if you, there are also if then statements as well. If you get all of your gear on, then within the next 5 minutes, then you can be the line leader out to the bus or out to recess. You want to make sure you're praising positive behavior on a regular basis. And it doesn't have to be huge behaviors. It can be small behaviors. Hey, I really like the way you're sitting with your feet on the floor. Hey, I like that your hands are staying busy coloring on the paper. Make sure that you stay calm throughout an entire process. Behaviors can go ahead and exhibit reactions out of adults as easy as it can out of children. So please make sure that you don't escalate along with the child as the behavior escalates. And sometimes we just need a neutral time for both of us to kind of take a step back and look at the world and go, okay, take a deep breath. The positive reinforcement looks different for every single person, adult or child. There's some items listed in the chart, but this is, again, a very limited list. You're better off to look at the headings that are listed. So food, sounds, drinks, scent, people, that sort of thing, than the actual things that are listed. Because again, you want to look at the category and find what fits for your child under that category.
I just want to mention that Lisa found this image, and I just was like, I wish I had had this when my kid was little. It would have just made things so much easier.
One of the things, I have traditionally taught in classrooms where positive reinforcement has been used. And we normally give out what are called reinforcement surveys to our families that are coming in to find out all of these different things. And I always apologize to families the first year that kids come. They normally stay with me for a year or two. But I always apologize that first year because the reinforcement survey that I normally hand out is about 13 pages long. And I'm like, please, I promise I'll only make you do this once. But the large number of items on there really helps us figure out what works best for each student, because every kid is different. And the other thing is every environment at home and school is different. So if we find something that's a high reinforcer at home, we don't want to necessarily use that as a high reinforcer at school, because eventually that's going to probably fizzle out. So we can use it sometimes to cross back and forth, but we don't want to use an item so much that it all of a sudden becomes non-reinforcing to a child. So it's important to mix up those positive reinforcers and not always have the same thing all the time, which comes back to those limited but reasonable choices. And sometimes limiting means pulling out one reinforcer and trying to introduce some other ones that the kid is not familiar with. Because again, you don't want to get into the position, let's say a kid likes candy or chips or some goldfish. I always ask people, what do you do when the kid's full? So you have to make sure you don't get to that point, even with a toy. Eventually there's a limit where the kid's like, I don't care about this anymore. I'm good. So you have to make sure that you have some variety and some reasonable choices, and you're kind of switching things out on a regular basis. So reinforcement ideas, kind of what are some of the things that you guys use or find successful? What are some good examples in your world?
I guess I have more good stories, regarding reinforcement ideas for my daughter, who's older, and I've used it longer. But I ask her, I get ideas from her. It's like, okay, I want her to do this. What does she want in return if she does this? If she completes this task. And so, that helps me out. And I always have, if she comes up with an idea I don't like, I always have a reason why she can't do that thing. Like, she'll ask for a big reinforcement ask that doesn't compare to the task I'm assigning her, right? And so I have to put her down, because she'll want to go to the pretty store and for doing her homework or something like that. And I'll be like, no, the pretty store is reserved to big things like getting your flu shot.
Now I'm interested in what's the pretty store.
So I don't really know if she came up with this or not, but Claire's.
Gotcha.
I've actually heard it called that by other kids, so I figured that's what you were referring to.
Yeah. And I think it was, her last birthday, she had a friend who had given her gifts from Claire's. And, I never give her that stuff because things break. She just doesn't take care of her stuff. And so it's just gifts from other people. And I think her friend referred it to as a pretty store. So now her big reinforcements are going to the pretty store. So like the flu shot, things that really are hard for her, that's what we reserve that positive reinforcement for. But other than that, she'll want a treat or want to play or go on the tablet, stuff like that. So that's my story there. And, I don't know if you want to reserve this until the end, but I had, just an idea about, what you guys have told me already about helping with to transition his attention from rubbing himself to not. I don't know if you want me to wait until the end.
We're actually almost there, so go ahead. This is the perfect time.
Okay. So, he had this mannerism that I've seen with other Down syndrome people. And we just initially thought he was having bowel issues, because they do have bowel issues too, Down syndrome people, they're weak. in their muscular areas. And we just thought he was always trying to have a bowel movement. And but when I started seeing it with other Down syndrome, I had seen it with another Down syndrome person, and they seemed to both do it at a time where it was like an excitement kind of situation. So then I thought, I bet this is a sensory thing.
Mhm.
And they're just like showing their excitement, by, I don't know if you can see my hands, but they're like this, on their, and they're sitting. Both times I saw this, they were sitting and doing that. And so I told my husband that. Well, not like 2 weeks later, and this is just a recent thing. And I know you guys are, it's just odd bringing it up, but he started then rubbing himself over the diaper
Mhm.
and getting himself excited. Well, at this point, we have to do something. I talked to the peds. They said it's normal, for even kids his age. Now they're aware of themselves, and now it's reinforcement for him because it feels good. How we first started doing it is now, initially we were doing kind of the negative reinforcement, and we're doing hands up, because he's normally like laying down doing it. And we can't always catch him when he's doing it. And then once he's already excited, it's even harder for him not to do it. And so just recently, I think this last week, because he does like positive reinforcement, he was rubbing himself. At this point, it's like, I don't know if it's, I can just tell he's excited because, I look because I caught it one day where his penis was a little red. And that was another concern because we don't want him to do it to the point of hurting himself.
Mhm.
And so we started putting Vaseline on it when it looked like, a little redness happened. And anyway, I know this is a long story and I'm kind of bouncing everywhere, but he was rubbing. I said, hands up. And he does it like automatically, and he smiles, like it's expected. And I don't know what he's thinking. And that's another thing that I liked about your PowerPoint was it pointed out, never assume understanding. And I got to remind myself that because, he is a 2-word user, basically nonverbal practically. And so I make all my assumptions, of his level of understanding. And so I praised him, like, when he smiled back at me, I was like, good job, lifting up his hands. But it's kind of like a game, he'll do it and I'll say hands up, but now I'm telling him to sit up. So, because, a lot of times he's like laying down, I'm trying to work, and, there's like a movie on TV or something. And, but I think what I'm going to try and do is more positive reinforcement, now that that's, a good motivator for him. And I liked your idea of like the fidget toys. I can get more fidget toys, and then every time he does it, I do like the idea of negative and positive reinforcement because that's one thing I tell the teachers at Joy is when he's hitting or something, I want him to know that's bad. I don't want him just to be redirected because the action isn't addressed. So I think, I ask him to use a firm tone. Mm-hmm. No. and then redirect, to a positive kind of thing. To me, I think, you need to, for a negative action anyway, I think if something's happening that's negative, they need that kind of negative reinforcement to, understand that that's bad, because if you just do positive reinforcement, to me, it's just, they're not identifying that action in a negative way whatsoever. They're just being distracted over here, So not that, because you had pointed out, never assume understanding, right? It feels good. It's not like not a necessarily negative thing, but you certainly don't want him growing up doing it in every situation.
I actually want to bounce off of that, Jessica.
Yeah.
Sorry, I shorten names. Sorry about that.
No, Jess is what I usually go with.
Okay. I shorten names automatically. I'm really sorry about that. So my nephew is neurodivergent, and he has self-stimulation issues from the very beginning when he was really, really little. And my sister wanted to do the same thing. She didn't want to, make that a bad thing, but she wanted to teach him that it was a private thing. And so what she did, and of course it took many years for this to, finally kind of click in his head, but every time he would start self-stimulating, she would actually take him into a room wherever she might have been that was private. And she would say, okay, this is something we do when we're by ourselves, when we're alone. And, of course he was young, so it was an age appropriate language. And, if they were at the store or if they were somewhere in public, she would say, okay, if you need to do that, then we have to leave. And so he learned that this was not something that he could do when he was around other people. Yes, he could still do it, and no, it was not bad. It was just something private. And so it took many years, because he is mostly nonverbal. His level of cognition is pretty low, so it did take several years for him to learn this. So she was able to save that sensory need while also not turning it into a bad thing and getting him to act appropriately in appropriate environments. And I think that, and that point in particular, especially when it comes to that self-stimulation, is really important, because we don't want them to feel bad about themselves or their bodies. And that's really important as they age, especially into adulthood.
So
Yes,
one of the things to bounce off of that real quick while I'm thinking about it is I know your child is young, Jess. So something I want to throw out, because I've seen it backfire on parents and on teachers. When you go and label that area wherever you want them to go. Good example. I had a family did an excellent job, taught the child that behavior could be done in the bathroom. No problem. The problem was we did not specify in the bathroom at home.
Mm-hmm.
We forgot those last two words. And let me tell you, the problems that caused before we were able to get that, because it took a long time to readjust that phrase in the child's head before they realized that it wasn't just any bathroom, because the rule was you do that in the bathroom. Mm-hmm. So really think about the long-term effects of what you're saying and how the child might not be able to generalize later on down the road what you're saying, because that is a huge one. And let me tell you, that took a long time to break that, because that particular child, anytime they saw a bathroom, that's where you go. And it didn't matter if it was a bathroom at a school, a bathroom out in public, a bathroom anywhere. It was a bathroom, right? That was the rule.
They probably associated that time of sensory, feel good kind of experience with every single bathroom.
Right. So my caution too is that not everyone understands our kids. I mean, we would love for the world to 100% welcome our kids with open arms, but we know that's not always necessarily, unfortunately, how the world works. The big thing that I think of long term with these kids is when they turn 18, they are legal adults. They will be charged as a legal adult, just like anybody else in the court of law. So in this particular example, say this child is 18 or over, goes into a restroom in Fred Meyer and gets caught. Somebody turns them in for indecent exposure. All of a sudden, we have a child with a sexual assault charge that now is not eligible to be in a group home because they have a sexual assault charge.
Mm-hmm.
Was it a malicious thing? No, absolutely not. The kid had nothing malicious about what they were doing whatsoever. But it is one of those examples of thinking about the long term of what we say. And I continually preach all the time when we teach our kids these replacement behaviors, or we deal with reinforcement development or positive behaviors or whatever. I always stop. I don't care what age the kid is. And the question I want myself or my staff to ask is this an appropriate behavior when the child is 18? Is the replacement behavior going to be appropriate when the child is 18? If it's not appropriate as an adult, it is not appropriate now, because there is the chance always that we may not be able to break this later on down the road. We may teach them something, but we may not be able to break it. And it might be super honestly adorable and cute while they're in elementary school. But when they're 18, it's not so adorable and not so cute. So really think about those long-term effects when you're doing those things, because it makes a huge difference down the road. And the one thing I really worry about is we do not have a huge amount of places, group home options for our students and our kids here in Alaska. We just don't. So in that particular example, say you have an 18-year-old, they've been charged with sexual assault. Now there's no group home for them here in Fairbanks. There may not be an eligible place in Anchorage, which means the kid is now looking at living in the lower 48 with their family here. And they've been separated if they need a group home of some sort for placement. So like I said, you have to be super careful and really think about those long-term effects when you are. Developmental age is important. It really is. But make sure that you are balancing what you're doing with the expectations of what may come when that child is 18.
That's a great point.
So one of the things that I just want to point out too is that, you know, there are a lot of what we call natural consequences as well, you know, and sometimes those can actually, if we just let those play out without interfering, that can be very helpful as well. So a good example of this is a girl brushes her hair before school. Normally she doesn't. Then of course she receives a compliment at school about her hair, which of course makes her feel good about it. So she brushes her hair more often in the future. That is a prime example of a natural consequence. And if we can keep our eyes out for those natural consequences, then we don't actually have to do the reinforcing, the environment does. And those messages stick even longer and more deeper.
And when I kind of go back to the bathroom example, another one that I have had that again wasn't a huge deal when the kid was little is the kid, for whatever reason, like to pop under stalls in bathrooms. And we just giggle, thought it was the most hilarious thing. And honestly, I mean, you look at this little itty bitty kindergartner and you think, okay, not a huge deal at this age. So we were able to extinguish the behavior while I had the child because I was afraid of what could happen later on. Unfortunately, well after the child was with me, they were, I think about, I want to say 19 or 20. Went ahead and was in the Bentley Mall bathrooms and popped under a stall The individual that was in the stall was less than appreciative of that happening. Not only did they end up beating up the child extremely horribly, because the child had entered underneath the stall, and to them, this particular child did not have any outward looks of a disability. All they saw was somebody come under a stall. The gentleman beat up the individual horribly, but then that is a case where the child was like charged as well. And then housing options became very, very limited, unfortunately. So that's what I mean about the things popping up later on too.
It's always been like my worst nightmare with my brother because his boundaries are just not great. And like,
Right.
you know, he'll go up and hug people and like hang on them, and like, you know, he wants to give you a kiss on the cheek, and I'm like, no. And you know, my mom isn't the best at like reinforcing the boundaries because she lets him do it. So like even now, you know, he's 33 and I still am like, no, you need to stop hanging on me. One, you're hurting me. Two, we're in public. And then, you know, he'll run up and hug people that he's just meeting, and I'm like, you need to ask for a hug. And like he hugged our waitress the other day, and I was like, can you not do this?
And
like
those are things that as a school, if we are aware of those things that are happening, we can help with lessons on teaching who is appropriate to possibly hug. And we do those in conjunction with the families. Like, okay, give me a list, like give me specific names. Like, is it okay to hug mom? Is it okay to hug dad? Is it okay to hug a grandparent? Is it okay to hug an uncle? Is it a certain uncle that is, you know, more receptive to it? Or do you have a family member, another uncle that's like, So we want to say, you know, when we see Uncle Steve, is Uncle Steve someone we can hug? Yes. When we see Uncle Mark, is he one we can hug? No. So, I mean, we can help families and students with building those boundaries, but we have to know that those are things that are going on and things that you want help with. And those are the things too, when they pop up, I encourage you again, and I say this multiple times, remember for IEPs, you do not have to wait until an annual date of some sort to have an IEP meeting. Now, something like that, you could probably just bring up with a team and it would be just as easy. But if you felt you wanted a full IEP meeting, a parent can call a meeting of the team at any time they feel they need it. So please don't wait and let a behavior get worse and worse and worse. A lot of times it's easy enough. You can just call a teacher and say, hey, can we come up with a plan with this? And it works. But if you do feel like you're not being heard for whatever reason, do call an amendment or a team meeting to discuss the student's behavior and bring those things up specifically so specific plans can be put in place to help extinguish or redirect those behaviors.
A quick strategy that I've seen used in the past that is really simple. If a child recognizes colors, do you guys all remember the red, green, go, stop game?
Oh, yeah.
Where you would, you know, one person would be, you know, facing forward and that would be stop, and you'd have to run towards them when they turn their backs. If you remember that game at all. Anyway, so what you can do is actually you can play red, green, stop, go with your kiddos and say, okay, a waitress is a red. You know, anyone out in public is red, unless it's someone we know, which is a green. So, you know, grandma is green, a waitress is red. And then when they're 16, they can come take friendships and dating with Katie. The friendships and dating class helps expand on those social skills even more and those boundary skills even more. So taking that red green, it can be really, really helpful because in their head, they can actually see the color, or it could even be like cards, have a red card and a green card that you can just hold up when you go into a public place. We've got the red card up and they will instantly know, okay, we cannot hug right now. We cannot kiss right now. We cannot touch right now. When they understand that red means stop. So really, really simple idea to make it really easy for them to understand boundaries.
And a lot of that, like I said, we often will work with families to get pictures of individuals in the family, like an actual physical picture, and put, a couple of different, we normally have, let's say a good example. And one way I've done it in the past is you have a green, a yellow, and a red. So if they go in the green, you can hug them anytime without having to ask. Those are people that love a hug no matter what. The yellow people are the people that you can ask if they want to have a hug, and we have to respect those boundaries. If they say no, we can give them a high five, we can give them a fist bump, we can, that's putting in those replacement behaviors instead of a hug. And our red are the people that we just don't, those are people that we don't hug. They're not, it's not appropriate. They don't want to be in our bubble. And so again, if we know those things are happening, we are happy to help come up with visual strategies. And then normally what happens is we start out with some visual strategies. We try to move them to some verbal strategies. And then the hope is oftentimes that we can kind of move a second set of the visual strategies at home after we have it pretty in place at school. The family can go ahead and work on the same stuff in a different environment, because again, generalization is a huge problem for some of our kids. Just because they can tell us doesn't mean they know what that actually means. Again, I'm not going to assume because you can verbally tell me, or you can put this kid in this person in the right category, that you understand what that means. So then we try to move it home. The family can kind of work on it. And then we start working on, maybe we accidentally cross a family member when we're on a field trip in Safeway. And then that's a good time to be like, oh, is that person, a red, a yellow, or a green person? And so we try to set up those kind of prescribed incidental run-ins so that we can try those things as they go along. The kid doesn't realize that Uncle Steve and Uncle Mark aren't normally at Safeway at the same time that we are. Like, surprise, it's really awesome today. We saw them both. That's so cool. So that's, again, part of communicating back with families, and definitely, again, letting the schools know what are those things that we can help you with that make life easier for you at home and your family at home. Because really, we all just want the best for the student in the end. That's our goal. Everybody wants what's best for the kid. And so working together is quite important in that area. I was noticing, Alyssa, is that, I see the name, is that correct? Do you have any questions or comments? You're sitting there so quiet with your mute on.
Oh no, I'm learning so much. This is really helpful, and I wish that I had this stuff when my kids were little, but we did find ways, without understanding this language, we found ways of positive reinforcement. So I'm really thankful for that, because it works. It really works, and I'm looking forward already to the next Parent Learning Hour class, because this is fascinating stuff. So thank you.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, if we think about it, we all live off of positive reinforcement. I mean, my positive reinforcement to come to work every day is that paycheck that I get. Thank you very much. If I didn't have that positive reinforcement, I don't know if I'd be here or not. Let's be honest. So in the end, we all run off of reinforcement, and we forget that the little things in life that we have as adults are the things that we reinforce ourselves with. We just don't think of it that way. By the time I get up in the morning and I let all the dogs out and I throw in a load of laundry and I load the dishwasher, that cup of coffee, that is my reinforcement. Thank you very much for getting everything done that morning. So it's just another way of thinking about it. The littlest things in the world that we do, the things that we keep doing ourselves to motivate ourselves, we're trying to find those little things that motivate our kids as well. And it can be the smallest, simplest things. Some kids just need a smile or a thumbs up or a high five. They don't need tangible items. The other thing when it comes to reinforcement that I encourage families and staff all the time to go ahead and work on is being able to turn anything into a reinforcement tool if you need, because you never know where you'll be standing and you never know what you're going to need. A good one that I'll do is hand staff a pen. Like, okay, how are you going to make that cool enough that they're going to want to do whatever? Paper clips, that sort of thing. So, I mean, a pen, you're taking it off. It might be that you're popping the lid off and it goes shooting across the room. That might redirect a kid's attention. Kids might like the fact that you can go back and forth. They might like the fact that if you roll it on the floor, it'll keep rolling, or it'll roll off of a desk and onto the floor. That can be hilarious. So I encourage you to look at everyday items. I mean, and we do that often. If I'm out and about and say we see a paper clip on the ground, I will challenge the other adults. How are you going to turn that into something immediately as a reinforcer if you need it, or a rubber band, or, you know, whatever you come across, because you can be in the weirdest places and you never know when you're going to need something reinforced. And that kind of goes back to the list that we had up of, you know, really trying to make sure that your things, the things that you have are limited, you know, so that you can have access to them. But also always have a contingency plan. If I don't have anything with me, say if all I have are my hands, how am I going to make that fun and turn that into a positive reinforcement if I need it like now? And some kids like games, some kids like noise, some kids like, you know, fluttering of fingers, some kids, you know, when it's your own kid, you can tickle a kid, you know, you can do all kinds of things. But I do encourage you to have a couple strategies and think about a couple strategies that you can do on your own with nothing if you have to in an emergency as well.
Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us today. I know we've run out of time. Our next class will be on February 12th, and we'll be taking a deeper dive into the secondary transition process for those older kids to help them progress into adulthood. Does anybody have any final questions or comments before we log off for today? All right, everyone, we're going to log off for today. Once again, next month, as usual, we have our second Saturday of the month at 10 a.m. If that doesn't apply to you, we will see you again in April. We are taking a break for spring break in March. Anyway, thank you again, and we will see you later.